This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
So we're living in like the age of this DNA onslaught where all these cases are being solved. And, you know, I'm still stuck in the Israel Keys case in my head. So as I was looking for like fall shows or seasons for us to do, I've got to step away and do a couple of different things, but I wanted to still be able to do another season of shows since we did the Cruel Summer on Israel Keys. The one thing that stands out to me about Israel Keys is we did come up with a way that you could potentially go and find where Keys have been. It takes more shoe leather than I have available. But that comes up in this episode because, you know, I've seen what they're looking for, and they may have already done part of this, but I don't think they have, because I don't think they've realized it. We did start to see a pattern in certain missing persons cases that make their way onto our high possibility list. Not high probability, but high possibility list. And I don't think they necessarily apply the entire time, but certainly when he was traveling. And that's what this particular episode becomes about. And I don't necessarily think that there will be DNA available in the Israel Keys case. But if you started to find his name in these places, then you could start to figure out the victims, and you could potentially come across both evidence and kill kits using this particular method. And, you know, the FBI could apply that with recruits. They could simply do it the same way they do the tip line, but focus solely on these establishments. And I think they'd have a lot more luck this way.
So without naming these people, like I found a woman who went missing in Washington in April 2004, and then a woman who went missing in June of 2004. But the problem I've had hunting down like some of these missing persons cases, which sounds like bizarre to say, I end up finding some people who are not missing. And this has been an ongoing what do I do about this? Because one of these people that was so interesting to me that went missing, she would be in her 50s today. And there is an Oregon, there's a Colville special investigator that was assigned to this. So this was like a tribal police thing. I like it interested me from the perspective of what happened to her.
The timing and then the fact that the Colville police were on it.
Right, yeah. So this would have been like prior to Keys, you know, having his boat, moving to Alaska and all those other things. So I've looked pretty hard. You know, we come across people like Arlene Bell, and now we've covered a later case of Zach Weston. And I was thinking like maybe that time period, like 01 to, I don't know, 05, 06, like maybe we would find the bulk of the victims. And I haven't found a lot of them. So whenever I come across one, it's really interesting to me. And it's funny because you were looking at these two missing persons. The second one that went missing in 2004, you know, this is another woman out there. She had too many sightings for me. Now, I have not proven she's alive, but I have proven that even though she went missing in June of 2004, I've proven that she was arrested. And if you look at the descriptions that I put in the show notes here, do you notice anything really interesting about these two people that we were just talking about without naming them? Sorry, audience, but without naming them, do you notice anything interesting about the two of them? Like that links the two of them weirdly?
Well, hold on.
The second one, she's been arrested in Rhode Island in 2011. That's how she's known.
I don't see anything immediately.
So she had an arrest in 2008 in Nevada. Which, what was weird about that is when I went hunting through, I found several of these people they go missing like prior to 2006 in Oregon, Washington. I find them in Nevada. Like they either still living there or having passed through there. One of them like lives there now, and the other one was arrested there in 2008. I just thought that was interesting that I was able to track because some of them have like pretty unique spellings and stuff to their name. But I start looking for their birth date, and I'm looking for their married names, if they had a maiden name, if they had like other like close people to them, looking for names in common. I've noticed that a lot of people go to Nevada and use aliases. This is the weirdest thing.
Oh yeah, well that doesn't surprise me. I've never been to Nevada, but I guess you mean Las Vegas, right? Like,
one of them was Vegas related, and the other one was just Nevada related. It was actually like the detention center wasn't in Vegas. I guess they could have been arrested in Vegas, but there's a mugshot that she had been. Like they're polite about it on the missing persons profile. They say she went missing here. She left mom or sisters or whoever's house, and I'm kind of speaking generically, and they were never seen again except for
this time.
And they were known at this time
4 years later
in this state and at this other time, right? so the signal for me when I see those in like missing persons files, particularly if it makes its way out of the file and NamUs repeats part of the information. Sometimes if like Charlie Project repeats the information, I'll look at it and I'll go, bet you that's an arrest. And that's why they consider it an official sighting. Because the two things that really trigger official sightings are medical information of some kind that pops up. Usually it won't tell them a whole lot about it as far as law enforcement or private investigators who are looking for this person. But it will confirm they were there.
Right.
And now you can opt out. I've noticed you can opt out of sharing any information about your medical stuff. But it used to be that you could call up and they would confirm that you had been there. Like say you'd been in an accident or you would be in some kind of police incident that like makes the news. The local news could call and try and get an update on the condition of the person. You opt out of that now when you sign a bunch of paperwork, but it didn't used to be that way. And in this instance, I believe both of these are arrests. One of them is definitely an arrest. And the second one was a warrant that I assume there was also an arrest related to. But I thought it was interesting that both of these women from 2004 that we were interested in for Israel Keyes victims are alive or were alive long after their missing date.
I think that it illustrates a really good point. Oh, wait, we didn't say who it was. Okay, so yeah, I don't, maybe I just need to not say anything. I was just going to say that these examples for me, it shows like you can't just look at NamUs or Charlie Project and go like through the data name and time they went missing. You've actually got to find out the details of their disappearance, the circumstances surrounding when they were last seen. And you have to sort of delve further because right off the cuff, everybody's not really a true crime missing person. Even though they're listed in the database, that doesn't mean that like we have any business talking about them. Does that make sense? Just from this, and we try to be respectful of that, but you do have to get a little ways in to figure that out. And I was wondering what you thought about that. Do you think that you were to find yourself to be missing, that you would like rectify that?
Yeah, I think mainly because I know how to do that. I would call up and just, I would do whatever verification I needed to do to prove I was safe.
Right. And so I imagine that, well, I guess like some people just don't care. I mean, they didn't put themselves on the list, so why should they do extra work to get themselves off the list? But I would love to know what the percentage of these cases are. Now, I feel like I've come across quite a few over time. The people are only missing to whomever reported them missing. They are living their life just fine elsewhere.
On my side of that, it's been a low percentage. I mean, okay, with all the missing persons cases that you and I have looked at in the time periods that we've looked at, less than 1% of them are the victims of serial killers.
Oh, yeah. It's
So
none of them hardly.
yeah, so of the 100% that we have looked at, I think probably something like 10 to 12% of them are still alive.
And not even missing.
Right. Like, and so
I don't know. I have no idea what the numbers are as far as that goes. What I do know is you're absolutely right, because typically, while anything's possible, anybody can look at different cases and they can make a determination that, oh yeah, well, this is probably what happened. And there's a few categories of things it'll be. Serial killers aren't rampant in our country.
Murders aren't even rampant, though.
No, they're not. And a lot of times, even when somebody is missing and they are believed to have been murdered, there's a pretty clear line to whomever they believe may have done it.
I would say probably 60% of the cases I've looked at, honestly, are either someone taking their own life or they are some form of misadventure, car in a pond, accident where they just haven't been found yet. So that's 60 of the 100%. I would say about 20% of the cases that I've looked at are either accidents or body dumps that were by the person who was last seen with the person. So that puts us up to about 80%. And I say accidents on purpose there. That's like people hit them with a car, people
oh my gosh, I just killed this person. Is that
and I got to get rid of the body. And then 10% of them are murders, also with the last person that they saw. And then that could be a serial killer, that could be anybody, but 10% of missing persons are murders. And then that remaining 9 or 10% in there, that's going to be they're alive.
Right.
They're not missing. They're just like someone is looking for them. Like the two we're looking at today. One, I think that she had pending warrants and the police put out a missing persons report for the second one. The first missing person that we have, I believe it's a wayward spouse that this person ghosted. I think they ghosted someone they'd only been married to a short period of time, and that spouse had to put up legal paperwork to find her, which triggered a missing persons case. He's lucky for him that she wasn't assumed to be a murder victim. I was shocked that I found photographs of her from February of 2020, and I looked at them. And I did a side-by-side of...
It's the first case where I've ever been tempted to be like, do you know that you're a missing person? Which I would never do that because it's not... Once they are alive and she's alive and well, it's none of my business anymore. That's how I feel about it. But I'm so sure that it's her. And I wasted so much time on this because, if she were to have been a victim of Israel Keyes, well, that's something that is our business. And it is something that we would want to do. And so until we get to the brink where we realize, oh, well, that's not her. She's completely alive and well. We are wasting our time, but I guess it's our choice to do it.
Well, I don't feel like I'm wasting my time. Here's my concern comes in on all of this is that she's a missing persons report that she represents one of two things. One, there's either the possibility that she's wasting time and resources of a police agency somewhere, or
I don't
two,
think that's the case.
There's a police agency that didn't do their job.
Well,
they should have found the same things that I found. Even if a private investigator was involved or a public servant were involved who found this, they should have cleared her as a missing persons case by contacting her.
But this is where, one day when I get organized, I'll be dangerous. But this is where it sort of, way back when I started seeing cases like this one where anybody can find this person on the internet and see that currently she is very alive and fine. So little things like that happening made me realize being in NamUs is it's just a process. It goes through the motion. It does not mean these cases are being looked into. It doesn't mean that there's somebody working the case. It's just something that they do because the Justice Department tells them to, right? Basically. And so we can have a clearinghouse for these missing people. Now, in your breakdown of the percentages of missing people, I'm curious. So you had it about the same to about 10% possibly murdered, and that included serial killers, and about 10% people who are possibly alive. So would you say an accurate statement is that you are just as likely to have been murdered as you are to be alive on the missing persons list?
Yeah, in some ways, and particularly if we start including the wider numbers, like if we were to start looking at it from the perspective of what's a runaway, blah, blah, blah. Because that number, if we looked at runaways and people who were reported safe, the numbers would all shift. Runaways don't count in anything of what I'm saying because they don't, believe it or not, runaways are not considered missing people. That's where people get these huge numbers of blah, blah, blah per year.
Right, but these are people who literally come right back.
Yeah. I don't know how to explain to people.
I have heard recently, and I believe I shared it with you, 600,000 missing people every year. Why aren't people doing something about this? There are not 600,000 people missing in the United States.
There may be 600,000 or 500,000 missing persons reports filed. That's where people get confused because missing persons reports happen for a lot of reasons, but a lot of them are closed as the person being found safely pretty quickly.
Right. And another thing that I find interesting is, and I'm sure you've read some of these cases, where there's actually culpability for why the person's missing. Like so-and-so was convicted of, first degree murder and sentenced to prison this year or whatever. And, but the body remains unfound. Right. You've seen cases like that. Okay.
Right.
And so in those types of cases, nobody's going to be working that case. If they've got somebody that they've convicted for the crime and they still haven't found the body, I don't know what the circumstances might be, but either they were uncooperative or they can't point authorities to the body.
Yeah. There was one I was reading this morning maybe that actually really shocked me because the guy tried to lead authorities to the body of this kid he had killed, and the truth was he didn't know where that body was.
Was it because he didn't do it?
No, he definitely did it. He did it, and he had done other crimes.
Remember.
He just could not accurately get back to where he was. There were other things going on in his world, mental health wise and drug use wise. He just literally could not get back to where the body was accurately. And that happens.
I believe it. I am not a good, thank goodness for GPS because I punch it in, I go, right? But I could be out in the middle of nowhere and dump a body and then not be able to get back to it. Not that I'm going to do that, but I can completely understand people not being able to get back to it. And it's almost like most of the time they look for some sort of landmark. It's 15 paces out from the tree or something like that. I don't know. And I always find that really odd, but I also kind of, I commend the idea that they took the time to remember where they're at. At the same time, with a couple of the cases, like you were saying today, having, spent time looking, it seems almost like it would be like everybody needs to check the list to make sure they're not on there.
and so that's sort of what's happening is we're going back through and we're checking off old cases because I I like to check them and then come back to them later and make sure nothing changed.
I've come back to several of mine, and it's interesting over the years how my perspective has changed on my own opinion.
Do you have an example of that?
No, not right off the head. But you said you were talking about us going back to old cases. I don't have an example of it, but like I was trying to, like with Zach Weston, it's like, oh, he's not a victim of Israel Keys.
Yeah.
And I don't know that my perspective changed on that as much as I just was anxious about it. I can't think of one right off the bat, but yeah, when I look at some of my opinions previously, because I imagine at some point in this investigation, some of these people would have been right at the top of my list.
Yeah, I mean, when I started all of this, Suzanne Lyle was one of the people that I thought was probably a Keys victim. But the further along I've gotten, the more I've realized that's impossible. For a number of reasons, she's not an Israel Keys victim, and I think it confuses people when I say that. I have a pretty firm idea of what happened to her, and I don't really share it because, a lot of people have looked at Suzanne Lyle. But she's one of those that, like, when I started this, probably sometime 2014 or so, I looked at her case, and if I remember correctly, the first thing I saw about her was like an FBI flyer, those red flyers with the FBI seal on it. Mm-hmm. And I went, wow, that's interesting. And I already knew a little bit about Israel Keys, and she was interesting to me. And now, if I were to go back and look at her case now, and I haven't looked at it in a very long time, I know she's not a Keys victim, primarily because Keys would have needed to have been sophisticated in a way he wasn't pre-Army to have done that. And also, I don't think Israel Keys has been using ATM cards since 1998. Because I firmly believe that occurred to him after reading about Gary Hilton, because Gary Hilton used ATM cards, and it was very prominent in the news. I think it was around 2009, 2010 that became a thing, and I think that's when. Do you think
that's how long? Like, he wasn't using them until then?
Israel Keys? I don't know. Like, I could see him using that one girl's EBT card. That was interesting. But that was different. That was going into a store. That was done walking into a store at a time when the store didn't have security cameras.
He was so paranoid about government stuff there.
Right.
I don't think he would have used it.
Well, I definitely don't think that he's involved in Suzanne Lyle, and I was sort of using that as an example of cases that have changed over time for me.
Do you think that let's say that Suzanne Lyle had been kidnapped, I don't know, pick any other place. Do you think that it would have been solved? In other words, this is basically roundabout asking you, was there enough investigative work done on her case?
Well, my answer there is complicated.
And I know
Suzanne's case is problematic because of the closeness. The way that Suzanne's case had to have gone down, it could not have been a complete stranger. There's a couple ways I can phrase this without giving away my personal opinion, all of that, because I don't, I think there's people out there that know what happened to Suzanne.
No question, yeah.
And I believe that law enforcement at that time and location simply did not have, it's like the Delphi murders. They had someone on the inside giving them bad information, which that person may not have actually been involved, but what they did to deflect the potential for their involvement ended up causing problems for the investigators.
That was you're talking about the suicide, right?
There were a couple things that I'm talking about there.
Okay.
There's a guy on the inside of that case that's 22 that looks like the bridge guy picture, that is from a family in the area that went in and was interviewed, and then he came out on the internet, deflected away from himself. And doing all of that caused the problem because the sketch was partly based on his description.
What?
So my point is, I believe that someone on the inside of the Lyle case gave information that maybe wasn't 100% accurate. And So the way that Albany could deal with that is, one, to hand it off to the troopers, which they're involved. The FBI is involved. I get that, but they're not involved on like a ground level investigation. But I believe they possess evidence, if they were to go back through their interviews and go back through like what they've developed in Suzanne Lyle's case, that they could look at what they've held back in their investigative file and go, oh shit, it's this person. Like, I firmly believe that that's a possibility.
What do you think? Because so it's my opinion that, and this skews both ways, but it's my opinion that in like cases like Suzanne Lyle's, if you had like the right investigator, they would have got the right information and the case would be solved. Because, and I actually have no idea about any of the investigators that worked her case. I just know that sometimes it takes pushing. You've got to push the intended parties. And, if you have somebody that committed this, whatever ended up happening to her, if they committed the crime themselves, they would have an enormous burden on them by this point. But if they only knew, if it was only them that knew, and then they get an attorney or, they just refuse to cooperate with the police and, they don't give them the information they need, this case just goes unsolved.
Yeah. So the problem with that case, like within the case itself, is the origin of the case is a campus police department. So no matter what you do, once you have a campus police department involved, it has to go to a new police department once it's realized there's actually something going on. So Suzanne Lyle disappears on March the 2nd. The campus police don't really get involved until late on March the 3rd. And most of the work that they are doing with the case is based on her parents. Her parents are the ones who figured out that the debit card had been used and where it had been used in Albany and at what time it had been used. So the delay is that the campus police don't know what to do. Albany can't get involved because of a jurisdictional issue. So the state police get called in. Now, when you have that happens, you literally lost the first 48. And in that case, you lost the first 96, meaning 96 hours had really passed by the time things were moving in that investigation. And they did track down quite a few things. So I don't think it's a matter of the investigators were wrong for that case. I think it just took place in an unfortunate jurisdiction.
Set of circumstances.
Yeah, the set of circumstances so it happens on a college campus, a big college campus, where their expectations are that college students do not return calls to their parents. And they don't take the Doug and Mary Lyle seriously. So you run into the situation where it's sort of dominoes falling. And the more they did catch a lot of information surrounding Suzanne Lyle's case, which that makes me think it is the right investigators. But the circumstances in which the case begins on a college campus and then sort of sprawls out into the city and then the state police have to get involved, by the time that happens and flyers are going up and everything, it's all forgotten about in college students. They don't really remember who they saw or what was going on there. It doesn't matter what they tell you. So my opinion of Suzanne Lyle's case, if she did not leave on her own, then my opinion is that it had to have either been a fellow student or it had to have been someone connected to her another way. And, for her to be a random serial killer victim,
it's virtually impossible.
It would be very weird. So what you're really looking for, her case is timing wise even, it's like the serial case, the murder of Hae-Min Lee. It's very similar to that with regard to young, Hae Lee was under 18, but not by much. And Suzanne Lyle is 19, so she's not over by much. And they're both happening. I think the other murder took place in 1999. This is 1998. But relatively speaking, they had the right investigators in the serial case with Hae Min Lee. They knew that there was really only one possibility there, and they were the focus of this massive movement to free Adnan Syed, who was convicted of Hae Min Lee's murder because he killed her. And so for that to be the case there, Suzanne Lyle is like the polar opposite of like teenage disappearances in the late 90s from, school, even though Hae is technically, high school and Suzanne is a big college. Albany and area there in Maryland, they're going to be very similar. Baltimore versus Albany is going to be very similar layout wise and like how things went down. Baltimore City Police would be better equipped for it. And who really should have gotten involved here is the Albany Police. They did not. It goes campus police for SUNY Albany, and then it goes directly to the state police who come in to assist.
Right. And so I think that being a girl, a female, that I was in college in the 90s and the early 2000s, I have these, Susie Lyle, and then, of course, Kristen Smart. I have these cases that occurred, like, paralleling or slightly ahead of, like, my life, okay? And there's when there's an unsolved case, it looms in the air, at least for anybody who knows about it. I don't think there's many people who don't know who Kristen Smart is, right? And as it's boiled down over all these years, like you were saying, things playing out on a college campus, when you have this unknown element of like, what the heck happened to her versus we know what happened to her, and it usually ties back to not a stranger, okay? And in Kristen Smart's case, Paul Flores has now been arrested, and he was the last person to be seen with her. And so to me, it's not that shocking because it's astronomically more likely that the last person seen with somebody is who did something to them, right? It's unfortunate when that's not the case, because the last person that is seen with them really gets raked over the coals most of the time. To me, though, it would just be really great, especially some of these cases. And, I'm not on the cases, so I'm just speaking from a strictly bird's eye view or third party perspective. It just seems like it would do everybody some good to not have them like looming out there open.
Right. And so that's the other thing that sort of brings us to today. So the first case that you and I were considering for this before we confirmed this person is alive, the reason it caught my attention in the first place is they went missing in 2004. The NamUs case wasn't actually created till December of 2008. So that first case caught my eye for that reason. The second case caught my eye, and we are not naming one or two. I apologize for that. It's just, these people are alive. There's no reason to drag them into this. They really shouldn't even be in NamUs. She went missing about a month and a half after the case number one in 2004. So, we're moving into the summer months of 2004. But her NamUs case wasn't created until May of 2017. And cases like that always get my attention for a myriad number of reasons. But what was fascinating about the June 2004 case was the differences in how that person looked. Did you happen to look at that one, by the way? The June 2000?
I didn't see that.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you first of all, the NamUs numbers get huge. We're almost in 40,000s. That Suzanne Lyle, I believe, is number 2 in NamUs.
Yes, she's number 2.
And so the cases that we're talking about here that didn't happen much, there were 5 or 6 years after her. These cases are in the 40,000 range, right. Meaning their missing person number, which Suzanne Lyle would be MP number 2. This other person is MP40 something.
Right. And most NamUs files began being entered in around that December 08 mark. That's when
Right.
you're going to find the slew. I'm going to look. I'm trying to look.
If you just look at the image files, you'll understand what I mean about this one.
Yeah, I had been trying to find it. It didn't come up though.
So this woman goes missing during a suspicious time in the Israel Keys timeline, sort of. At least as far as all of the paperwork on her is concerned, she has a very specific missing persons date in 2004. And they put up an image that is her, 2004, essentially her driver's license. But right there in the case file, you come across some information that is incredibly useful to prove that hunting down this person is useless. It's under images and documents, what I'm talking about. So this person went missing in 2004. What do you see that's wrong about their images and documents?
There's an image from 2011. There's an image from 2008.
And so just you and your uneducated opinion right now, what are those two images?
Mugshots.
Exactly. So the 2011 has a follow-up mugshot, and it doesn't get better.
So don't you think, though, like in this case, okay, so this is kind of mean because we're not saying who it is, but don't you think that somebody was literally copying this off of a piece of paper and not thinking anything about it at all?
I wanted to know how they got in to NamUs on May 4th of 2017. And here's what I decided. I went and looked up the case contact. What they meant to type in here is that this person went missing in 2016. And if you click over to contacts, you'll see what I mean. There's an agency case number that indicates that this woman is not 2004. She is actually a case from 2016. It's just a major typo.
Really? That's it?
Yep. So the agency case number is 16-28028. And the date of last contact they had that they put in here was the date of last contact for their local county. They didn't realize that that's not going to be a missing person who has mugshots in 2008, 2011, and I have found one from 2012. When I found the 2012 one, that officially rules them out of the Israel Keys timeline because he was incarcerated when that 2012 mugshot was taken. But they posted the 2011 one, which is what I'm using to illustrate my point to you.
Right. And so having found, when you start noticing these little things that come up, because it's a great tool, but like any tool, you have to know how to use it. And a lot of times there's so much more to the story, and a lot of things, like you did in the percentage breakdown, a lot of things can be ruled out right off the bat, just ruled out, because it just wouldn't make sense. But then I think about Bill and Lorraine Currier.
I know, and that's the reason I bring these cases up, which brings me to my next case. But why do you think about Bill and Lorraine Currier?
Well, because I would have written them off as a most likely I would have written them off as a domestic something, because both of them were gone and because the gun was gone.
Yeah, I would have probably written them off as either a domestic. It depends on if we found their car or not. Since we know their car was found, it makes it a little harder for me to wrap my head around.
I don't know what I think about that in that particular situation, because that is actually really weird, because it was found in a parking lot, right?
Yeah, it was parked next to a dumpster at one point, and then I think he had plans to do something with the car, and when he came back, the cops had already found it.
He was going to burn it.
Yeah, he was going to burn it or do something with it. So that brings me to the first case today that I want to talk about. This is a Washington case. This is a guy from Seebeck, Washington. And where he was last seen in Seebeck was really interesting to me. I don't know if you've ever looked at Seebeck, Washington on a map. It is out there. Specifically, this was next to the Scenic Beach State Park. Are you familiar with that area? It's
not really.
It's close to the ferry.
Okay.
It's on the other side of the bay there at like Hood Canal from Olympic National Park.
Okay.
So the first case for today is a guy named Ken Lee. His middle name is not Casey, but for some reason he had the nickname Casey. I assume he actually has a middle name that starts with a C. But a number of things about Ken Casey Lee struck me as what's going on here. Ken Lee goes missing on October the 24th of 2002. I've sort of ignored that time period because we don't have a lot of information about Keyes to really go on from that time period. But one of the things I have started sort of digging into more and more as we go along is people that end up in NamUs for no real reason later on. And Ken Lee is one of those cases. Now, Ken Lee is also a disposable missing person, meaning cops assumed he got himself into something and they really stopped looking for him. But in 2017, for some reason, the FBI started putting together a file on Mr. Lee. I do not have the contents of it yet. I do not know what's in it. I have confirmed it exists, but I could not figure out why a 15-year-old cold case interested the FBI until I started reading about him. Ken Lee was last seen in Seebeck, Washington on October 24th of 2002. He had gone out to meet with some associates and never returned. His car was later found abandoned in the Safeway parking lot in the 2800 block of Buckland Hill Road in Silverdale, Washington. Lee was a self-employed worker who built drain fields for septic tanks. He was described as an outdoor enthusiast. In August of 2001, he had been sentenced to 366 days in prison for conspiracy to deliver methamphetamine. This was a pretty long sentence for this kind of crime. It's referenced in the now defunct Sunleak, and Charlie Project pulled it over and mentions this paragraph, so I want to throw this out here. Police had found propane tanks and other drug-making paraphernalia in his car, along with around $5,000 in cash. In his house, they found 200 grams of methamphetamine, about 800 doses. It is not known if Lee's prison sentence had anything to do with his vanishing, but authorities think that his disappearance may have been drug-related. In other words, they wrote him off. The reason that you get that kind of sentence for your first offense here, and at the time, this guy, he was not like a super young dude when this happened. He would be 56 today, so he would have been 38 years old when he went missing. A month after Lee vanished, an area man complained to the police that he was beaten with a sawed-off aluminum bat and a chainsaw chain. The alleged assailant was charged with third-degree assault in Kitsap County Superior Court. The victim says he believes he was attacked because the assailant thought he had given the police information about Lee's disappearance. It is unknown if the assault had any relation to Lee's case. Lee remains missing. No one has been charged in his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. However, foul play is suspected, and a death certificate has been issued.
I have to say, I'd probably write him off too. I hate to be that way because
I would have. I would never have talked about him. I had his name on a list from this like missing people in Washington thing. I wrote him off, but what I want to know is why is the FBI interested in Ken Lee?
Well, because of Keyes, obviously.
I think it's because of Israel Keyes.
Well, yeah. Isn't that... Oh, I don't know that we've ever really talked about that, but it's my assumption that a lot of the missing persons cases from, 99 to 2012. 2011. A lot of those missing persons cases, when they have been entered into NamUs, like from 2013 forward, there's not a whole lot of them. Some of them have nothing to do with anything, but some of them I feel like they're put into NamUs so they can be missing people in NamUs because the FBI has put two and two together, and it all has to do with Israel Keyes.
Yeah. And so that's one of the things that we've sort of been going back and forth on for a while now. I get very confused when old NamUs cases show up. And by old, I mean they're put in. For instance, if you go on NamUs and you do an advanced search, you can see a number of things about when the cases were put in. And if you go and look for, say, January of 1999 through December of 2011, the rough time that we know Keyes was looking for people, you could even expand it to his arrest date in March of 2012 if you're really feeling like punishing yourself. But throw in like NamUs case created after 2021. Realistically, the number should be tiny. It should be like 5 cases that were put in there.
Because that's historically what it would be.
Yeah, it would just be like a few cases are added in. But the last 2 years, starting with 2020, like if I put in January 1st, 2020 as the NamUs created date, and I put Israel Keyes' timeline in there as what I understand to be his timeline, meaning, 1998 or 99 through 2012. What's interesting is there are 463 new names that were added. So that means that I'm never going to be done researching this nonsense because new missing people are going to constantly be added into this. And that wouldn't be that big a deal, except this last go round, 9 of them were from Oregon, and a dozen of them were from Washington State.
But don't you just feel like that's good news? Like,
well,
I don't feel like you could find a case that the FBI is investigating that isn't a NamUs, like, because the whole point of NamUs is, so it's almost like it's a first step. Like,
well, so take Mr. Kinley, for instance. I would juxtapose against him a guy named Michael Eric Hansen. He disappeared on November the 4th of 2007. And I know you haven't seen this case. I'm just going to briefly describe it to you. He was 45 years old. Michael was last seen somewhere in Yakima, Washington. Not specified where, but they find his vehicle located by the Yakima River. The keys are in the ignition. The park brake was pulled on. The driver's side door was open, and his belongings were on the seat. But he was nowhere to be seen. He's 45 years old, 5'7" tall. He's 140 pounds, and he was considered to be a Native American Indian as race goes. Here's my question for you. What do you think happened to that guy? I assume they wrote him off because they think he jumped in the river, don't you?
I mean, yeah, that's what it sort of seems like.
Well, so his case is date of last contact, November 4th, 2007. That's when they find his car sitting by the river. They enter him into NamUs February 24th of 2021.
So what do you what
I have no idea. But the investigating agency is the Yakama Nation Tribal Police, and they have a case number that's 075617. So I asked them about information related to this case, and guess what they told me?
That they can't give you any because they're working on it?
It's an open investigation. And that wasn't the only one in Yakima. We mentioned Sally Stromberg recently. But there were multiple cases between those little sweet spots for me, 1999 and 2012, that suddenly popped in where now they're saying these people are missing. And some of them, I look at them, like, have you ever heard of Okanagan County before? I have not.
I haven't.
If I go and I Google male missing Asian Washington State, a new guy popped up on the list that I had never seen his name before, named Kino Gomez. Somehow he is male and Asian. His nickname or alias is Miguel Santos Esquera. He was last seen in Okanagan, Washington on July 30th of 2009. Makes no sense for Keyes to be there. Makes no sense for this guy to have anything to do with Keyes. But it's one more thing that you have to run down, amongst all these people that are like randomly missing. It's
Unless you find out.
that his case is open and active, and they assured me that an investigator would be in touch with me.
Hold your breath.
Yeah. Well, I have another one from this time period. She went in January 14th of 2021. Her name is Ashley Rodia. She's a 17-year-old white female, 5 foot 5 inches tall. Last seen in Seattle. She goes into NamUs on January 14th, 2021, and she had heterochromia. So one eye was one color, other eye was another color. She has a Seattle Police Department report. She doesn't show up on any other list anywhere, not in NCMEC. She just went poof.
Well, so unfortunately, the data is a little bit skewed because we have NamUs really getting kicked into gear about 2008. And so that's really only, 13 years of time that's gone by. Yeah. So in the future, someday somebody's going to look at it and, they'll look back and they'll be able to, see whether or not it's because basically what happened when NamUs was started, like all those backlog files have to be, entered. And so I think that just the case being entered in 21 that occurred in, like you said, 2009, I think that that's like way too long, like even for a backlog, but it is entirely possible. However, I feel like it's because these names were moved to the top of somebody's pile. Yeah. For some reason. Now, but like I said, the data could be skewed and it really could be that they're just now getting around to it. But I doubt that. Because they have to play catch up, because not only do they have to put new cases as they come into NamUs, they've got to have all the cases that are still open put in. And so in 50 years, we'll be able to tell like if this is an anomaly or if it actually is a thing. But I feel like it's very skewed and it shows something. And the only thing I can think of it showing is that all of a sudden, they are looking for his victims. They're pulling missing people who have never been on the forefront of anything, and they're putting them into NamUs so they can in turn investigate their case.
Yeah. There was one that was just put in recently of a guy that was fishing, last known to be at the Lone Pines fishing site near Dallas, Oregon. 5'5", 110 pounds. Went missing May 20th of 2010. Literally just went into NamUs. So this is going to be an ongoing thing. Eugene Hyatt just got put in there. Eugene Hyatt was not in there before. I don't know if people know this or not, but this is the boyfriend of Cammie Vollendroff. And Cammie's...
yeah, I did know he wasn't in there, and I always wondered about that.
Yeah. So there are multiple people that come up where, we could go back through and cover all of them at some point, mainly from the perspective of, it's interesting to look at them. There's a lot of people in Oregon who went to the park and never came home that are in this pile. A lot of people, the same thing happened in Washington. People went missing from fishing holes. People went missing from trails.
So how do you distinguish? We covered a case maybe a couple of episodes ago about somebody hunting, like elk hunting. And I felt confident that man really did wander off, and he probably built himself a little shelter. But so I felt confident in that. But because I think the previous day he had been brought back by the loggers or something, he had wandered off. But other cases, it's a lot harder to make a call on it as far as because we have no way of knowing. These cases, and especially if they're just now getting put into NamUs, they are dead in the water, no pun intended.
Yeah, they're dead on arrival to us.
And it's nearly impossible to, and so we had the elk hunter that probably had some sort of dementia. But then I'm like, well, maybe he didn't, And then I think we talked about a case that was like probably too early for Keys, but then my brain starts spinning. I'm like, that's exactly what he's telling people when he's talking.
Yep.
And I was taking people, I would, back when I was smart, I would let them come to me. And I can just imagine all these people out enjoying the wilderness, just walking right into, Keys territory.
Oh, I found like the craziest thing I have found out of all of this was February. I think it was this year. There was a February case that popped in there, and I had the same moment that you're just talking about. So this guy was from May of 2001. So I bent the timeline, moved the timeline. The gist of it was, when does Keys get out of the military? When is his kid born? Going back and forth. But this is from Maupin, Oregon. And a guy was presumed to have drowned at Shearers Falls. So I start looking, that's the Deschutes River. I start looking, it's the final waterfall on the Deschutes River. And I'm just like scrolling through. And at the end, there's a note that he was with his friends and he didn't make it to the rendezvous point. His name is Sam Allen Burgess, and that's from May of 2001. He was a 20-year-old kid who is presumed to have drowned at Shearers Falls. And I was like, how does this just making into NamUs in February 18th of 2020? And here's the conclusion that I've come to from a lot of this. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of Keys cases this summer. And one of the things I've noticed that is in common with the bulk of the NamUs cases, not all of them, but the vast majority of them. Guess what is different about the NamUs cases going into Keys' timeline so late in the game? And I mean, a lot of them, say a 2001 case, for me, it's late in the game if they put it in 2012, 2013. But now I'm talking about anything that happened between 99 and 2012 that is just making it in between 2020 and 2021.
There's a presumption.
What's the presumption?
Well, whatever their presumption is.
Oh, you mean they think they know what happened to the person? They drowned or they had a misadventure or whatever.
Isn't that what's different? There's
no.
Okay.
It's almost entirely men.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
It is almost entirely men, which, there's Ken Casey Lee, there's Sam Burgess to look at. There's this other guy that I was looking at the sort of the Summer of the Couriers nonsense I was doing. But that got me to thinking about this weird anomaly of Israel Keys being somewhere in the South or Southeast United States in September of 2009. This is back to this random Houston car rental that shows up. And this is likely not a Keys case, but because it's likely not a Keys case, I am going to talk about this case. It's interesting for a number of reasons. And I'm having a little bit of problem getting information about this case. It's another one that I am having to deal with state agencies and local agencies from multiple places because they're not entirely certain what happened to this guy. But there's this creepy encounter in the middle of it, so I want to talk about it. I started with his case, and then I found another case that I was very interested in. So this is Brian Anthony Worley. He goes missing on about 2 weeks after this weird rental car thing on September 24th of 2009 out of Carrollton, Georgia. And Carrollton, Georgia is an interesting place, but more specifically, where he is Lake Carroll. So he is basically depending on what you read, he's either at his aunt's house or his parents' house. But this guy is, at the time, 39 years old. He's 5 feet 7 inches tall, 140 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes, kind of looks like a farmer surfer boy. He had a number of things going on that were interesting to me. Well, the first one is he has a heart condition and was wearing a pacemaker. The reason that's interesting to me is because you could find yourself in a situation where, a robbery or something could cause a serious problem if you're someone who has a heart condition. He was dealing with family issues in a local probate court. But what is creepy about his case? Well, let me tell you the Charlie Project version, and then I'm going to tell you like something really weird about this case. Charlie Project says he was last seen in his parents' Carrollton, Georgia home in the early morning hours of September the 24th, 2009, where he had been staying since September 21st. A neighbor saw him working in his garage at 2 a.m. Worley suffered from insomnia. He slept odd hours, so it was not unusual to see him up and about. When the neighbor left for work, Worley's car was gone, and he had an appointment at 9 a.m. at the Carroll County Probate Court. Probate Court, for those of you who don't know, it's where you go to deal with estates and deeds and wills and trusts. He did not show up at 9 a.m. in probate court. He left behind most of his possessions. His cell phone, medication, clothing, shoes, and toiletries were still at that house. But his vehicle, which was a light blue four-door 1992 Buick LeSabre with Georgia license plate, was gone. So this guy vanishes on September 24th off the face of the planet. In December of 2009, his car is recovered in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It no longer has the Georgia license plate, but instead has a stolen Tennessee plate. Some of his belongings are still inside of the car, and the keys are in the ignition. His iPod and several other personal items, however, have never been found. This guy, he was working as a land survey professional. He was doing something where he actually lived away from Lake Carroll. He didn't live there. And the impression that I got was that Brian was dealing with his job and trying to do something to settle his parents' estate. And the house had been empty, but he would come down and stay there. I found a different version of how it went down with the neighbor. That the neighbor was inside of her house, which like she had a view of Brian's garage. And when she turned on the light, she could see that there was a figure standing in the garage, but she couldn't tell if it was Brian or not. She just assumed it was him. Lake Carroll is a pretty well-known fishing spot. This is one of those things where I look at it and I go, was this guy like close to some place that Keys was going to like put a fishing pole in the water and just happened to see him? Because this house had been marked on a local real estate site as for sale. It was empty, but like, I don't know that it was actually for sale. I think they were clearing up in probate court what was going on with it. And I can't get the specific records of what they were trying to do. But I think that he and his sister they could have been trying to sell it, but they could have also been trying to, like, one was trying to sell it, one was trying to maintain the house. Okay, up until recently, he was thought to have been found, and the GBI would not give me any information about him. I don't know if you remember. They told me, they kept telling me to come back in like X number of days, but that there was scientific evidence outstanding. It's not outstanding anymore, but he's still considered an open case, apparently. Brian's case is driving me a little nuts because his case seems to be a case where a vehicle has been moved over state lines. And I wondered if like this was the type of thing that Keys was describing. Now, you at one point had said, hey, I think Keys got those. Like he's got an image in his head of like robbing a bank and going over state lines. And, you know, I think he got these things mixed up, and that's why the cops think it's Deborah Feldman. And so the house was abandoned, and I think it had a for sale sign at that time.
Right. Yeah. No, I did hear that. So there was nobody living there, and now he had 9 siblings.
Right.
Okay. And I've never seen any talk about him having, like he wasn't married, or I don't know about him having any children. But I think what you were looking for was spatial thinker. You said his job was interesting, and because he's described as being a spatial thinker who worked as a land surveyor before he went missing. And so I imagine spatial thinker it's seeing things from a certain perspective.
Okay, yes. And then I have something I want to say about that.
Like he's maybe a little bit airheaded.
Okay, but hold on. I understand what you're saying there, but I want to read something to you.
Okay.
So in June of 2010, there's an interesting article that came out that I want to handle very carefully because of how I'm just going to say the article the way it is. This is from Project Q. And it says, investigators in an Atlanta suburb searching for a gay man who vanished in September hope a $10,000 reward might provide some clues in his disappearance. Brian Anthony Worley, a 40-year-old land surveyor in Atlanta and an owner of a farm 2 hours north, disappeared from his parents' home in Carrollton. He left behind money, cell phone, medication, and overnight bag as if he was going to be right back, said Jeff Rolstein, Worley's partner of 13 years. Since the car was discovered in early December in Chattanooga with a stolen tag, the investigation is stalled. No hits have been recorded on Worley's financial accounts, and the auto didn't provide any clues for the investigation. Police suspect foul play. Now, a relative in the city of Carrollton have offered $10,000 in reward money for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for Worley's disappearance. We're hoping the money will be an encouragement for someone who has information on the case to come forward, said Carrollton Police Detective Tony Johnson. A local ground and aerial search was conducted after Worley's disappearance. Investigators then traveled to Chattanooga in December to investigate, and will go back again next week, to distribute flyers concerning Worley and his car. Johnson said investigators are trying to establish where Worley's car was between the time he was last seen and the last week of October. The best investigators can determine is that a black male in his 20s with a slender build, wearing a short-sleeved black shirt and dark pants, was seen parking the car on Judson Lane at Chamberlain Avenue North in Chattanooga during the last week of October. It remained in that location for more than a month before it attracted anyone's attention. Okay, so he had a partner. He had a long-term partner. He basically had a husband. 13 years is a long time. That person would have known if he were up to something. So it gets... Like, normally, if he had just disappeared locally, I would go, it has to be the husband. Or something like that.
Well, okay, so there was no one in the house.
It's an abandoned house. Like,
Okay,
I mean...
Just him. Like, his husband wasn't there with him.
No.
Okay. Well, so the overnight bag to me, but then I thought, okay, so his cellular phone, medication, clothing, shoes, and toiletries being left behind like that. I was like, well, that probably means it's not Keys, right? Because Keys like to take things like that. But then I realized when you said that they were in an overnight bag, like maybe he packed it up and he forgot it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you talked about his furs that he left by the door in the Texas house that he burnt up.
Yeah.
Which was strange, but he was going to take fur coats. Like, that adds sort of a weird dimension to things. But, okay, so a longtime partner, so he wasn't there with him. And it normally took him about an hour to drive from Atlanta to Carrollton, but due to flooding in the area, it had taken 4 hours for him to get there. And that's why he ended up spending the night.
Yeah, normally he wouldn't have spent the night there. It's weird, right? The more you dig into this case, the weirder it's going to get. I don't know. I mean, there's just something about it. Like, why hasn't anything been done on this case, really, you know?
Well, I don't know. It seems to me like, what a disaster.
Okay, so this case is interesting, right? Because it's sort of what Keys describes. It's in 2009, right?
The neighbor seeing the figure in the garage sounds exactly like Keys hanging out at the Courier's, yeah.
So that was one of the things that stood out for me. So I went looking just to see if there were any other odd cases in Georgia at the same time. And this is what I found. The day before this woman went missing, her name is Angela McCarthy. And if you go looking for her, okay, this is another one that GBI and I are butting heads on, as well as the local police. They're saying it's an open investigation, and I'm saying it's 2009. So no matter what your thing is on this being an open investigation, it's a really old case. So when I go looking for Angel McCarty, when I go looking for cases, I come across Angel McCarty. On Wednesday, September 23rd, 2009, at approximately 6 o'clock p.m., Dawn Angela, known as Angel McCarty, she leaves her residence, and this is in Brantley County, by the way, it's way down in Georgia. And everybody who is there and who knows her says it's not unusual for her to be gone several days. However, she doesn't come back. She's never seen again. So on September the 29th of 2009, she's reported missing. No solid leads were ever established as to her whereabouts. It is assumed that it is drug-related and that she ripped someone off. That is the presumption in this particular case. However, on Tuesday, July 30th, 2013, human remains were found in a wooded area off of Highway 110 in Brantley County, Georgia. Later on, they determined that the remains were McCarty's and that her death was ruled a homicide, and that there were suspicious circumstances surrounding her disappearance and the location of where her remains were recovered, and that the investigation would be ongoing. So she disappears in 2009. Open case. 2013, they find her remains, and they're looking for her killer. I am not saying the Keys has anything to do with this, because more than likely this is some kind of drug ripoff. But it took place within 24 hours of Brian disappearing in the same state along a highway. Now, what's weird about it is it's not good geography. But you said something that made me start thinking maybe cases like this were possible. When you were talking about the fact that he would fly into one place, you said Chicago. In this instance, it would be Houston. And then went to visit family in Indiana or wherever, and then wandered his way over to Vermont to kill the couriers. You gave and he also had gone to New York in there. So you gave a pretty good description of how that went down for me, which is what made me think the couriers and Kevin King and that whole debacle going on up there in July of 2011. And I wondered if he had done it elsewhere in the U.S., and if so, something like this is what it would look like. I'm not saying this is it, but going over and killing Angel McCarty, who he would find probably either walking on the side of the road or in close proximity to her house. Not super interesting case-wise. And then she's basically a forgotten homicide because of wherever she was down there, they wrote her off as essentially having ripped off some drug dealers who killed her. Same thing with Kevin Lee. What do you think of her case?
I think that there could be some sort of tie between Keys and her, that I would rethink several other cases. That's what I initially think, because the whole random girl located in the woods, it's a common but not super common thing that happens, right?
Well, I've started finding them in Delaware, Washington, Vermont, and Georgia. I found they have to fit certain criteria, the ones that I'm looking at, and that is, as far as anyone is concerned, when Keys was alive, they were just a missing person. They have to be that. That's the first part. Secondly, they had to have been taken from a remote area. So, in my mind, Deborah Feldman doesn't work because Hackensack is not remote. I mean, it's remote to New Yorkers, but it's not remote. And then the third thing is, if their body had been found, it had to have been after 2012, basically.
Right. Well, so I have no idea if Angel McCarty could be Israel Key's victim. However, I do feel like the neighbor's account of what happened to Brian Worley is notable. And the situation he seemed to have, by happenstance, found himself in, where he was it took him a lot longer to get to his parents' house, and then he sort of got stuck there, and then he disappears. It's a little crazy, that whole situation is. And so I feel like that, should definitely be considered. And then just by, timing, I would say that, now I don't know, like, how far away are these two instances from each other? Do you have any idea?
It's a hike.
Okay. Well, so, and so anyway, so having to give, Brian Worley, a second glance, I would say that Angel McCarty, based on the timing of her disappearance, that should be looked at as well. But I have no idea if it's Keys. I've always sort of thought,
We still need to stay away from these cases for the most part. And you're right.
well, but here's the thing, though. Just because I don't think it's Keys, I feel like Keys would have. I don't feel like any of Keys's victims are going to just be found out in the woods, right? I think that he would have covered them in some way, just because of even like in the house where the couriers met their demise, he put them in garbage bags under a bunch of junk, is what he said, right? Which is absolutely terrible, but that's his account of it. And so it's my opinion. But see, we don't get those details here. And that's sort of where a couple of weeks ago we were talking about someone who had went missing like right after he would have gotten out of the army. And there was no information except that she was found naked. And so we don't know if she was out in the open. We don't know if she was in something. We don't know necessarily how Angel's body was recovered, except that her remains were in the woods. Right. And, they don't say she was shot. So there's that. I think that no matter how long the remains have been there, if somebody's been shot, it's apparent. I think that when it's, flesh wounds and the flesh deteriorates, I think if they're strangled, though, they can tell still. Even skeletonized remains will show the hyoid broken from the strangulation.
They can show it, yeah.
And of course, like, I don't know if people who are strangled with zip ties, if they
wouldn't be the same thing.
I don't know that the hyoid bone breaks necessarily. I don't know if it's more of a deprivation. Anyway, that stuff makes me really queasy.
Ah, gotcha.
So, I don't know if that's more of cutting off the blood supply.
Yeah, you're cutting off the oxygen in the blood supply with a zip tie,
as opposed to breaking the hyoid bone or whatever.
Right.
Okay, so
with Megs and what she wanted to point out to me was a sort of a long process that she had gone through with a lot of these victims that became really important. And I'm going to let her kind of tell you in her own words, but it is a long recording. I'm condensing it to sort of wrap up why we're talking about Brian Worley and Angel McCarty today. And here is the gist of it. She pulled up for me on Google Earth. So she pulled up the area around Brian's disappearance, or his last known location, and started to show me what was around Brian's house and how similar it was to other crime scenes that we thought Keys might be involved with, and to the couriers that we knew he was involved with. So it was similar to the couriers for one huge reason. It was also similar to Rosie, and it was similar to several of the scenes in that it's not only a fishing hole, it's very close to a small mom and pop hotel.
Right.
And I'm trying to think, okay, so we saw it really quick with Rosie out in Wyoming. And then here, it wasn't immediately apparent because I wasn't looking further. I wasn't looking across the lake.
Yeah, you have to dig. You have to zoom in really far. It's a mile away, so it's not as far as it sounds. But you have to. There's an efficiency lodge and a Red Roof Inn that are a mile from his house. So you ask about the car thing. The trend with this is he could park at the little motel, walk,
Right.
to the victim, whoever the victim's going to end up being. In this instance, it would be Brian Worley, who is across the lake, a mile away from the hotel. It's under 2 miles, but he has to walk a little ways, takes their car, brings the car back, and then he ends up leaving the car somewhere with the keys in it, and some poor guy ends up taking it.
Well, it's not too bad because he hasn't been caught yet or anything.
Right.
Yeah, but so basically what we're saying is that it could have been that the car ended up in Chattanooga because he's left it somewhere when he was done. But also, and I'm just saying, this should be trackable, but I don't know. There's an Enterprise right there, so
there's a rental car place right there.
He could have turned his rental car in,
right, and
driven to Chattanooga and got a new one.
Oh, that's evil to think about. But
I'm just saying, we know some of the stuff that he did. I know that there was the question as to whether or not he, demanded a new car when he was on his third or second, I don't know which trip, to Texas. And so it was his third trip because it was right before he was arrested because he thought his car had been seen on the ATM camera. And so we know how he was, right? And so he very well could have taken the car in and dropped it and left it there and stolen somebody's car and driven away. There's no telling. If I wiggle it, I can definitely make it work. But so beyond sort of just making up the story with the car, I would say looks like something that's setting itself up to be something he could have done.
Right. So again, the position that we would be in here if we were trying to connect Brian Worley to Israel Keys, in my opinion, is you go look at the rental records, or you go to the Efficiency Lodge and this other small motel
Red
here,
Roof Inn, and
you try and see if you had Israel Keys staying there in September of 2009, and that would link you back to Brian Worley if you had Israel Keys in either one of those places.
That's going to be the key, isn't it?
Yep. The little motels is going to be the key. That's the pattern. The pattern is little motels that are likely just now digitizing or digitized in the last 10 years or have been sold and bought by you're going to have to find old ledgers where people have signed in for the rooms or people have taken, because 2000s, they would have been taking driver's licenses and IDs in a lot of these places. He gave up his driver's license and ID in a lot of these places.
Right. He was staying under his own name. Right. That is going to be...
The key to finding Israel Keys victims is going to be finding the hotels he stayed in that don't show up on his financial records, meaning he paid cash for them, but he still used his name. That is going to be the key.
Wow.
The key is going to be these little hotels. And what is the one in Essex? The Handy Inn and Suites or whatever? Is that what it was called?
Something like that, yeah.
Is if you can find what hotels he stayed in, then you look for a victim like that Handy Suites or whatever it is. And I don't think that place exists anymore. That's the other problem you're going to run into is, if you look at the Handy Suites in Essex, which is closed, what was it? It was all Susie Wilson Road is what they put into the paperwork there.
Yeah.
So let's think about that for a second. That means they're off Susie Wilson Road. Then we have to figure out, how did he choose? He walked there, right? Is that how he described it?
Correct.
That's a half-mile walk.
I would say...
That's what you're looking for is half a mile to a mile and a half. Yeah, 2 mile radius. So missing person, 2 mile radius of their house. You're going to need a shitty motel for somebody who's cheap to be staying there. That is the key to finding Israel Keys victims, is going through the missing persons list, literally looking at it.
Close enough for him to walk.
He needs to walk. And that is where you'll get probably 8 of the victims right there. Thank you for joining us for our Cruel Summer episodes, where we go back to looking at Israel Keyes. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
Watch me, caught up in the light, I'm falling. Tripping to the night, I'm all in. Drifting in your tide, we're flawless. I can't help but think about it all night. Every take a dozen nights away. This feeling is swift like a river running to you. It make me go. Sunrise, perfect on your face, talking all night, memorizing ways you feel right, fit into place so dreamlike. Didn't have to think about it anymore. How I take a dozen nights and go. This feeling is swift like a river running to you. You make me go. Got it done, you make me go. Got it done, you make me go. Got it done, you make me go.